Yes, they wouldn't be in my front bench with the language that's been used, but I understand what the Prime Minister's saying. There's an investigation underway, and I don't know all the details, but I've seen the messages.
Douglas Ross, Scottish Conservative leader, here in the studio. Morning.
Morning, Matt. How are you?
Very good. Very good. Thanks for coming. On. But let's start there where Katrina left off. Never mind what to do about Nicola Sturgeon, which we'll come on to. What do you do about your own party? They've made things an absolute nightmare for you, haven't they, in Scotland?
Well, look, I think the Prime Minister's been very clear that mistakes were made with the previous administration, and he immediately sought to rectify them and get trust back into the economy, back into the country, and we're already seeing positive signs of that. We've obviously got the autumn statement coming up in a couple of weeks' time. There's a lot of focus on that, but also, what we will do for the remainder of this Parliament. Almost 2 years to go, and there's a lot we can do. Again, as Katrina was saying, through Michael Gove's department, levelling up across the United Kingdom, and I'm very positive about what the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are going to do to help people right across the UK.
Is it frustrating for you? Because obviously, being a unionist, you agree, you believe in the greater whole. That you are part of a greater thing both in the union but in the Conservative Party, and yet everything that goes on in Westminster makes your life harder.
Well, there are challenging times, and there's no doubt this has been a challenging period. And if you speak to my predecessors, there have been similar challenging periods throughout the time. But, I'm focused on what we're doing in Scotland. Obviously, I'm also an MP, so I'm down here at Westminster today. But in Scotland, there are huge challenges that are nothing to do with the Conservative Party leadership, the Prime Minister. These are devolved issues that Nicola Sturgeon should be and is held accountable for, but very rarely answers. And I think, if you were saying you were doing a debrief on FMQs last week, one of the biggest responses I get in my mailbox is, why does Nicola Sturgeon never answer the question? And it's because it's always about deflection. It's about blaming someone else, despite the fact that she has been in charge either as Health Secretary, Deputy First Minister or First Minister for a decade and a half. So we need some responsibility from the Scottish Government as well.
But and yet they still dominate, the SNP dominate politics.
Well, look, this comes down to the constitutional argument. There are people who support the SNP not because they're doing a good job with the health service, because they're not because they're doing a good job in education, because they're not because they're keeping our streets safer, because actually they're cutting police numbers. They support the SNP because they see them as the best vehicle to separation. Now, I totally oppose that, but that is the problem we've got in Scottish politics, that the SNP largely hoover up all the votes of people who support independence. It's not a ringing endorsement for Nicola Sturgeon or her ministers, because really their record is one of failure and continuing failure.
Is it not a ringing endorsement as much as the SNP have dominated politics in Scotland for a decade, and therefore people think they would be better off? They're not saying we want an independent Scotland run by the Conservatives?
Well, most opinion polls are not saying we want an independent Scotland, because actually opinion poll after opinion poll, even with independent supporters, are saying on Nicola Sturgeon's timescale, which, remember, is in less than a year's time, she wants to have an independence referendum to divide Scotland all over again in just 11 months' time, when actually there are huge priorities that should be the focus of the Parliament and certainly the government.
Do you think that referendum is going to happen?
No, I don't. I think it's ridiculous that Nicola Sturgeon is spending money, resources and government time issuing papers on the economy of an independent Scotland that don't answer some of the basic questions. She's accepted now there will be a hard border between Scotland and the rest of the UK. Again, going back to questions that she didn't answer. A couple of weeks ago, I went on the issue that the Scottish Times led on about EU officials saying it would absolutely be a requirement for an independent Scotland to commit to joining the euro to get back into the EU. And of course, Nicola Sturgeon is saying she both wants to be back in the EU, but she doesn't want to commit to joining the euro. So all of these things mean for me that independence would be an absolute disaster, and Nicola Sturgeon shouldn't be concentrating on that. She should be concentrating on all of the other issues that are within her remit.
You mentioned your predecessors who've had sort of various relationships with Westminster.
And now have good careers on Times Radio.
Well, exactly right. I was going to mention Ruth Doe. She took the Conservatives from third to second place at Holyrood. In 2017, the party got its biggest win in a general election since the days of Margaret Thatcher. Since Ruth went, it's all gone backwards, hasn't it? You've blown that inheritance.
I'm sorry, Matt, you haven't done your research, because Ruth, I'm sure, will tell you the next time you meet. Actually, in 2021, we had our best ever election results. So we maintained 31 seats.
In Scotland, in the
Scottish Parliament. We maintained 31 seats, and we got additional votes, almost 100,000 additional voters across Scotland back to Scottish Conservatives. And I was listening to Katrina there suggesting a wipeout for Scottish Conservative MPs. Well, I've been there before. I've been told I wouldn't get elected, and I was elected in in Murray for Westminster and re-elected when the exit poll was suggesting there'd be a wipeout. So
But when the
don't underestimate what the Scottish Conservatives can do.
When the Labour Party is on 20, 30 points ahead in the polls, you must be worried that we could be looking at a Conservative wipeout in Scotland again.
Well, I'm going to obviously campaign ferociously for Conservatives to be re-elected and to win additional seats. Remember, we have 6 seats at the moment. Scottish Labour have 1 seat. They went down from 7 to 1 in the last election. So we hold 6 seats at the moment. We have excellent constituency MPs from the borders right up to the northeast. Andrew Bowie, now a minister, and David Duckett as well. And we will be defending those seats very strongly. And I don't believe some of the predictions of a Conservative wipeout.
You don't believe that?
No, I don't. As I say, Matt, it's been predicted before. It was predicted in 2019. We were told there would be no Conservatives left in Scotland, and 6 of us were returned and we're back in government.
But that was fewer. You did lose seats.
Yeah, yes. But it wasn't a
you
wipeout.
About half, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it wasn't a wipeout. That's the point I'm saying. I went into I remember election night, I told my wife that, I will now be home a lot more because I had a 1% chance.
You thought you were going to lose?
I had a 1% chance, according to the exit polls, that I would hold on to my seat. And here I am speaking to you, not just as Scottish Conservative leader, but MP from a home area of Murray.
If we had a general election now, would you have the same conversation with your wife?
Well, it would be a few weeks' time because one, the election would be in 4 or 5 weeks' time, and secondly, I've already committed that I'm not standing again for Westminster. I'm going to focus on Holyrood.
That's a good point. Is that because you're worried about losing your seat?
No, it's because I made a commitment when I became Conservative Party leader in Scotland that I wouldn't have the dual mandate beyond the next general election.
Let's have a listen to it. This is a little clip for Nicola Sturgeon I want to play. I was going to list them myself, but she does quite a good job of your occasionally changing position on issues. So let's just take a listen.
But Presiding Officer, I'm not sure we should put much store at all on anything Douglas Ross has to say. Let me just reflect on the last few weeks in the life of Douglas Ross, leader, for now, of the Scottish Conservative Party. He called on Boris Johnson to resign, then he U-turned, then he called on Boris Johnson to resign again, then he U-turned again. He demanded that I follow the mini-budget. Then he applauded Liz Truss for scrapping the mini-budget. He voted for fracking in England. Now I think he welcomes the fact that the fracking ban has been reinstated in England. Just last week or the week before, he said that Liz Truss would win the next general election. And days later, he welcomed the resignation of Liz Truss. Today he backs Rishi Sunak. Who knows what Douglas Ross's position will be this time next week?
How do you feel listening to that?
Well, the question that led to that answer was about the health service in Scotland. So what I was feeling was, why doesn't the First Minister address the concerns that we both had raised with us? I was raising cases about people who were struggling to access A&E departments, struggling to access a health service in their local area, and she has a pre-scripted rebuttal to me, and it's great. I know what it was like as a minister. I was at the dispatch box responding, and you could basically answer whatever you wanted because you knew there was no right to reply, particularly on the 4th question. And there's things in there that are just blatant lies. The one about fracking in England, the First Minister must know that's wrong, because actually what I voted for was an amendment, and then the amended piece of motion went forward to the House that wasn't divided on. So what I supported was the exact same as what Labour, the Liberal Democrats, the SNP and all other MPs voted for.
You did call for Boris Johnson to resign, and then you told him to stay.
I will come on to that, Matt. Honestly, but that's lying in the Scottish Parliament. That's what Nicola Sturgeon gets away with. She recently had to correct the official record because the example she was using about how much renewable energy Scotland generates was just patently wrong. So I think people expect a bit more of their First Minister. Yes, she can do the, boo-ha-ha of politics, but actually speaking about health, answering on health, she could have maybe given a response on health as well. But yes, I called for Boris Johnson to go. During the conflict in Ukraine, along with several others, I said that wasn't the right focus to be replacing the Prime Minister at that time. Then we had a vote of no confidence. Now, the conflict in Ukraine was still ongoing, but I had one opportunity to say, did I have full confidence in the Prime Minister, and would I have it for the next year, because that was the rules of the 22 committee, and I couldn't say I did. But I took a position, and it simply changed because of a conflict in Europe, which I never thought I would live through again.
But you can see why that list of you called for him to resign, then you U-turn, you called for him to resign, and you
Well,
U-turned.
I think a war in Europe is a pretty.
But why
big
though?
reason.
Because if you don't have confidence in Boris Johnson, you don't have confidence in Boris Johnson, regardless of what's happening in Ukraine.
And I think people know what I think about Boris Johnson, probably what he thinks about me. But when I woke up, I remember it was a Thursday morning because we had FMQs that afternoon, and I started my remarks by saying the world we woke up in this morning is a far darker place than when we went to bed the night before. That's how massive that unjust, illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia was. And I do think it was right to take the focus away from Partygate, important though that was, to the issue of the day, which was conflict within Europe.
What about Liz Truss? You welcomed her as leader, you welcomed the mini budget, then you welcomed her resignation.
So, look, the bigger story would have been if I said I didn't welcome the new Prime Minister, or I didn't think the leader of the Conservative Party would win an election. You know, Nicola Sturgeon...
When you said you thought she'd win an election, were you lying?
Well, it was a question on Question Time.
Yeah.
Did I think Liz Truss could win the next election? And I think it would have been a massive story if any Conservative panellist had said a Conservative leader couldn't win the next election when we're over 2 years away.
But when you asked that question... you lied.
No.
You thought she couldn't win, but you said something else to avoid a big story.
No, I'm saying that would have been a big story if I'd said something else. But we were 2 and a bit years out from an election.
Yeah.
I assumed the Prime Minister at the time would have been the Prime Minister going into that election. I don't think anyone anticipated Liz Truss being the shortest serving Prime Minister ever.
Isn't this why people get fed up with politicians? Is that you don't answer a straight question. And this is true of all parties, not a particular point about you.
I did.
You say one thing, you don't think Boris Johnson's up to the job, and then you think he is, and then you think he isn't. You ask a straight question. When Liz Truss is in a massive mess, you say she's going to win the next election, and now you're telling me you didn't actually think that.
No, I'm saying it would have been a massive story if I'd said another answer there. And I was responding to a point based on that day. But look, I'm not the only one that changed my mind on Boris Johnson. 60 of his ministers, who right up until the final days had said he was the right man to continue to lead the party and the country, changed their mind. Nicola Sturgeon has also changed her mind quite a bit. Remember how she used to tell us Alex Salmond should be the first minister of an independent Scotland? Where's that relationship gone since?
But she hasn't gone backwards, then forwards, then backwards again.
No, but she has previously supported Alex Salmond, and when it becomes difficult for her to answer questions about Alex Salmond, suddenly her amazing memory fails her. And we saw that again with the ferries fiasco on Friday when she was up in a Scottish Parliament committee. When there are difficult questions for Nicola Sturgeon, when she is challenged on her record and what she has done or hasn't done, she suddenly tends to forget the crucial information.
What's the... We'll move on and talk about her in a sec, but I just want to ask you, what's your sort of percentage split of what decides what happens to the Conservatives in Scotland between what happens in Westminster and the extent to which you're sort of master of your own destiny? How much of your ability to achieve what you want for the Conservatives in Scotland comes down to what happens in Westminster? Is essentially outside your control?
Well, I would say less than probably people in London think, and no disrespect to you, Matt. But
that's why I was asking the question.
If you watch the media in Scotland, it's largely portraying, out with exceptional times that we've been going through recently, events in the Scottish Parliament. So I do think, yes, when there's major interventions such as new Prime Ministers, a general election, a budget, etc., actually the focus of a lot of the media in Scotland is based on what happens at Holyrood.
Is life a bit easier that you've got Rishi Sunak now?
Well, I obviously met Rishi a week ago, so I've gone from Downing Street, Rishi and Larry the Cat last Monday to yourself here, Matt.
There's no cats in here.
I know. in Times Radio. So, I'm looking forward to having a good working relationship with him.
Douglas, we last week on the show we did FMQs Unpacked. We paused the Holyrood action to try and analyse what was going on. As normally we do PMQs, but on Thursday we did FMQs, and I think I was struck, and I think listeners were struck as well, just quite how difficult it is to nail down Nicola Sturgeon. The Prime Minister in Westminster not always answering the question is not a unique thing. In particular, this was Nicola Sturgeon. You were asking about the NHS, and this is Nicola Sturgeon's response.
Of course, people are right to be worried about the ability of our National Health Service to cope with spending constraints and the impact of Tory mismanagement on our economy. Yeah, we've just heard, since we've been in this chamber, Presiding Officer, we've just heard that interest rates have been increased by the Bank of England to 3%, the highest for 14 years, the biggest single increase since Black Wednesday in 1992. That's the cost to people of Tory economic mismanagement. On the health service. Of course, in Scotland we have higher funding per head of population for the NHS compared to the rest of the UK.
Douglas Ross, the thing that really struck me about that was talk about have your cake and eat it in one answer. People are right to be worried about the spending restraint forced on us by the Tories, but thanks to us, we've got higher funding per person on the NHS. How can you deal with that? Where simultaneously everything is bad because of the Tories, but everything is great at exactly the same time because of the SNP?
Yeah, well, it's because of the union dividend, and we know that per head of population, people in Scotland benefit, by a huge sum of money, every single man, woman and child, over £2,000 annually for being part of the United Kingdom. It's then up to the Scottish Government to spend that properly, so Nicola Sturgeon will claim all the credit for investing in the NHS, but claim or take none of the criticism when it's not going right. I mean, that question that I was asking about was a series of questions about scans being sent to Australia, cancer scans to be checked in Australia. We were speaking about delayed discharge, which is now at a record level, when just 8 years ago, one of her current cabinet members, who was the health secretary at the time, promised to eradicate delayed discharge, and now it's its highest ever level. And I was also quoting the chair of BMA in Scotland, who said that doctors were terrified for the winter and the year ahead. And what they got back and what I got back was a response about Westminster bad, nationalist and SNP government good. And I don't think it's suitable. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's what people expect from the First Minister.
How long? Because I think it certainly from a sort of Westminster perspective, it's constantly amazes sort of political watchers that Nicola Sturgeon seems so impenetrable from precisely the criticism you're talking about. And you're laying it all out, and it's on her watch. Health is a great example, and I presume this is why you go on it at FMQ so much, because it's completely devolved. It's entirely within her gift. And yet, the SNP outpoll you. She's still, given how long she's been there, her personal ways are still pretty good for a politician of that longevity.
So going back to, first of all, the topic of health, one, I quite often go on it because it's the most common thing that people get in touch with me about from all over Scotland. Secondly, it is fully devolved, and the decisions taken about Scotland's NHS are taken only by SNP ministers and the First Minister. And of course, Nicola Sturgeon was Health Secretary and Deputy First Minister before she became First Minister. So throughout the 15 years that the SNP have been in power, she has been right at the forefront of the NHS.
Must drive you mad.
Well, it drives me mad, but it also drives constituents mad. And one thing I quite often do once I've had my 4 questions is I'll have a quick look at my phone to see the critical response from Twitter. But I also see the emails that are coming in, and people at home that are absolutely furious that the First Minister is, in many cases, ignoring their plight, who is making light of their big issues within the NHS to allow her to have a bit of a go at me or a bit of a go at Westminster again. And I think they would expect the First Minister to be more on the ball with the issues that they're facing.
Talking of looking at your phone, what would you do if one of your MSPs behaved like Gavin Williamson? Sending abusive text to colleagues.
Yeah, it's not acceptable. I think the Prime Minister's spokesperson says that's not acceptable, and there's an investigation going on at the moment.
If one of your MSPs did that, frontbenchers, would you sack them?
Yes, they wouldn't be in my front bench with the language that's been used, but I understand what the Prime Minister's saying. There's an investigation underway, and I don't know all the details, but I've seen the messages. I think in the Independent or something.
Sunday Times.
Sunday Times, was it?
Times,
Sorry. So I did see that, and I wouldn't expect it from any of my colleagues in Holyrood.
Talking of other colleagues, if one of your front benchers went to the I'm a Celebrity jungle, what would you do about them?
Well, that's a situation we have had in Scotland, obviously, because Kezia Dugdale, the former Labour leader in Scotland, did exactly that. And again, I think the criticism of Matt Hancock is absolutely correct at the moment, because we all, as representatives, are elected to Parliament either in Holyrood or Westminster to represent constituents, to ask questions, to respond to constituents. I'm sure he's got an excellent team that can do some of that work while he's away, but I think it's totally the wrong priority.
Do you think he's completely mad? Do you think he's going to rehabilitate his reputation?
Well, I'm not sure he's going to get the reach to new voters I think he was speaking about, because I do remember Kezia Dugdale said she'd hope to do the same, and I'm certain Kezia did that, a lot of talking while in the jungle, but the way it's edited, that type of interesting stuff for a politician is not normally very interesting for an editor of a show like that, so it tends to get cut out.
Do you watch it? Would you ever do it?
I would never do it. One, I'm not a great fan of heights, so the challenge last night would have put me off, and I'm not particularly keen on snakes or eating some of the things they're asked to eat, so no, I would never do it.
will you be voting for Matt to do appalling things?
I don't think I'll be voting, but I will be watching. We'll see how it goes. By the sound of things, there'll be plenty of other folk willing to vote for him to do these things.
I think you might well be right. Would you like to send Nicola Sturgeon to the jungle instead?
Well, I'm quite keen to get Nicola Sturgeon out of Holyrood, that's for sure, because I think she and her government are damaging Scotland and Scottish politics.
Do you think you'll ever be First Minister?
I hope so. I'd really love to do the job. I think it's important that we have a range of experience in the top job and different parties. That's why the system was set up in the way it was in Holyrood. I also come at this from quite a different background from all the other political leaders in Scotland. I represent a rural area, whereas the rest are in urban areas. I went to college rather than university, so I think there are things politicians across the political spectrum can offer in Scotland.
Go on, put a date on it then. When are you going to be First Minister? If you said that Liz Truss would win an election, you could put a date on it.
Well, let's see how the next few years go. We have 3.5, I think, if I get my sums right, 3.5 years to go until the next Holyrood election. So
anything could happen.
There's a lot of water can go under the bridge before then.
It was really good to see you. Really appreciate you coming in.